Hi, like and subscribe for the more true, scary stories. Story 1.
Excerpt from a local newspaper. Ominous unknown killer is still at large. After weeks of unexplained murders, the ominous unknown killer is still on the rise. After little evidence has been found, a young boy states that he survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely tells his story. "I had a bad dream, and I woke up in the middle of the night," says the boy. "I saw that for some reason the window was open, even though I remember it being closed before I went to bed. I got up and shut it once more. Afterwards, I simply crawled under my covers and tried to get back to sleep. That's when I had a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up and nearly jumped out of my bed. There, in the little ray of light, illuminating from between my curtains, were a pair of two eyes. These weren't regular eyes. They were dark, ominous eyes. They were bordered in black and just plain out terrified me. That's when I saw his mouth, a long, horrendous smile that made every hair on my body stand up. The figure stood there, watching me. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he said it. A simple phrase, but said in a way only a madman could speak. He said, 'Go to sleep.' I let out a scream. That's what sent him at me. He pulled up a knife, aiming at my heart. He jumped on top of my bed. I fought him back. I kicked. I punched. I rolled around, trying to knock him off me. That's when my dad busted in. The man threw the knife. It went into my dad's shoulder. The man probably would have finished him off if one of the neighbors hadn't alerted the police. They drove into the parking lot and ran towards the door. The man turned and ran down the hallway. I heard a smash, like glass breaking. As I came out of my room, I saw the window that was pointing towards the back of my house was broken. I looked out it to see him vanish into the distance. I can tell you one thing. I will never forget that face. Those cold, evil eyes, and that psychotic smile. They will never leave my head. Police are still on the look for this man. If you see anyone that fits the description in this story, please contact your local police department. Jeff and his family had just moved into a new neighborhood. His dad had gotten a promotion at work, and they thought it would be best to live in one of those fancy neighborhoods. Jeff and his brother Lou couldn't complain, though. A new, better house. What was not to love? As they were getting unpacked, one of their neighbors came by. "Hello," she said. "I'm Barbara. I live across the street from you." "Well, I just wanted to introduce myself and to introduce my son." She turns around and calls her son over. "Billy, these are our new neighbors." Billy said hi and ran back to play in his yard. "Well," said Jeff's mom, "I'm Margaret, and this is my husband Peter, and my two sons, Jeff and Lou." They each introduced themselves, and then Barbara invited them to her son's birthday. Jeff and his brother were about to object when their mother said that they would love to. When Jeff and his family are done packing, Jeff went up to his mom. "Mom, why would you invite us to some kid's party? If you haven't noticed, I'm not some dumb kid." "Jeff," said his mother, "we just moved here. We should show that we want to spend time with our neighbors. Now, we're going to that party, and that's final." Jeff started to talk, but stopped himself, knowing that he couldn't do anything. Whenever his mom said something, it was final. He walked up to his room and plopped down on his bed. He sat there looking at his ceiling when suddenly he got a weird feeling. Not so much pain, but a weird feeling. He dismissed it as just some random feeling. He heard his mother call him down to get his stuff, and he walked down to get it. The next day, Jeff walked downstairs to get breakfast and got ready for school. As he sat there, eating his breakfast, he once again got that feeling. This time it was stronger. It gave him a slight tugging pain, but he once again dismissed it. As he and Lou finished breakfast, they walked down to the bus stop. They sat there waiting for the bus, and then, all of a sudden, some kid on a skateboard jumped over them, only inches above their laps. They both jumped back in surprise. "Hey, what the hell?" The kid landed and turned back to them. He kicked his skateboard up and caught it with his hands. The kid seems to be about 12, 1 year younger than Jeff. He wears an Aeropostale shirt and ripped blue jeans. Well, well, well. It looks like we got some new meat. Suddenly, two other kids appeared. One was super skinny, and the other was huge. Well, since you're new here, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Over there is Keith. Jeff and Lou looked over to the skinny kid. He had a dopey face that you would expect a sidekick to have. And he's Troy. They looked over at the fat kid. Talk about a tub of lard. This kid looked like he hadn't exercised since he was crawling. And I, said the first kid, am Randy. Now, for all the kids in this neighborhood, there is a small price for bus fare if you catch my drift. Lou stood up, ready to punch the lights out of the kid's eyes when one of his friends pulled a knife on him. Tsk, tsk, tsk. I had hoped you would be more cooperative, but it seems we must do this the hard way. The kid walked up to Lou and took his wallet out of his pocket. Jeff got that feeling again. Now it was truly strong, a burning sensation. He stood up, but Lou gestured him to sit down. Jeff ignored him and walked up to the kid. Listen here, you little punk. Give back my bro's wallet or else. Randy put the wallet in his pocket and pulled out his own knife. Oh? And what will you do? Just as he finished the sentence, Jeff popped the kid in the nose. As Randy reached for his face, Jeff grabbed the kid's wrist and broke it. Randy screamed, and Jeff grabbed the knife from his hand. Troy and Keith rushed Jeff, but Jeff was too quick. He threw Randy to the ground. Keith lashed out at him, but Jeff ducked and stabbed him in the arm. Keith dropped his knife and fell to the ground screaming. Troy rushed him too, but Jeff didn't even need the knife. He just punched Troy straight in the stomach and Troy went down. As he fell, he puked all over. Lou could do nothing but look in amazement at Jeff. Jeff, how'd you? Was all he said. They saw the bus coming and knew they'd be blamed for the whole thing. So they started running as fast as they could. As they ran, they looked back and saw the bus driver rushing over to Randy and the others. As Jeff and Lou made it to school, they didn't dare tell what happened. All they did was sit and listen. Lou just thought of that as his brother beating up a few kids, but Jeff knew it was more. It was something scary. As he got that feeling, he felt how powerful it was, the urge to just hurt someone. He didn't like how it sounded, but he couldn't help feeling happy. He felt that strange feeling go away and stay away for the entire day of school. Even as he walked home due to the whole thing near the bus stop and how now he probably wouldn't be taking the bus anymore, he felt happy. When he got home, his parents asked him how his day was, and he said in a somewhat ominous voice, "It was a wonderful day." Next morning, he heard a knock at his front door. He walked down to find two police officers at the door, his mother looking back at him with an angry look. "Jeff, these officers tell me that you attacked 3 kids, that it wasn't regular fighting, and that they were stabbed. Stabbed, son!" Jeff's gaze fell to the floor, showing his mother that it was true. "Mom, they were the ones who pulled the knives on me and Liu." "Son," said one of the cops, "we found 3 kids, 2 stabbed, 1 having a bruise on his stomach, and we have witnesses proving that you fled the scene. Now, what does that tell us?" Jeff knew it was no use. He could say him and Liu had been attacked, but then there was no proof it was not them who attacked first. They couldn't say that they weren't fleeing, because truth be told they were, so Jeff couldn't defend himself or Liu. "Son, call down your brother." Jeff couldn't do it since it was he who beat up all the kids. "Sir, it was me. I was the one who beat up the kids. Liu tried to hold me back, but he couldn't stop me." The cop looked at his partner and they both nod. "Well, kid, looks like a year in juvie." "Wait," says Liu. They all looked up to see him holding a knife. The officers pulled their guns and locked them on Liu. "It was me. I beat up those little punks. Have the marks to prove it." He lifted up his sleeves to reveal cuts and bruises, as if he was in a struggle. "Son, just put the knife down," said the officer. Liu held up the knife and dropped it to the ground. He put his hands up and walked over to the cops. "No, Liu, it was me. I did it." Jeff had tears running down his face. Poor bro. Trying to take the blame for what I did. Well, take me away." The police led Liu out to the patrol car. "Liu, tell them it was me. Tell them I was the one who beat up those kids." Jeff's mother put her hands on his shoulders. "Jeff, please, you don't have to lie. We know it's Liu. You can stop." Jeff watched helplessly as the cop car speeds off with Liu inside. A few minutes later, Jeff's dad pulled into the driveway, seeing Jeff's face and knowing something was wrong. Son, what is it?" Jeff couldn't answer. His vocal cords were strained from crying. Instead, Jeff's mother walked his father inside to break the bad news to him as Jeff wept in the driveway. After an hour or so, Jeff walked back into the house, seeing that his parents were both shocked, sad, and disappointed. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't see how they thought of Lou when it was his fault. He just went to sleep, trying to get the whole thing off his mind. 2 days went by, with no word from Lou at JDC, no friends to hang out with, nothing but sadness and guilt. That is until Saturday, when Jeff is woken up by his mother with a happy, sunshiny face. "Jeff, it's the day," she said as she opened up the curtains and let light flood into his room. "What? What's today?" asked Jeff as he stirs awake. "Why, it's Billy's party." He was now fully awake. "Mom, you're joking, right? You don't expect me to go to some kid's party after—" There was a long pause. "Jeff, we both know what happened. I think this party could be the thing that brightens up the past days. Now get dressed." Jeff's mother walked out of the room and downstairs to get ready herself. He fought himself to get up. He picked out a random shirt and pair of jeans and walked downstairs. He saw his mother and father all dressed up, his mother in a dress and his father in a suit. He thought, why they would ever wear such fancy clothes to a kid's party. "Son, is that all you're going to wear?" said Jeff's mom. "Better than wearing too much," he said. His mother pushed down the feeling to yell at him and hid it with a smile. "Now, Jeff, we may be overdressed, but this is how you go if you want to make an impression," said his father. Jeff grunted and went back up to his room. "I don't have any fancy clothes," he yelled downstairs. "Just pick out something," called his mother. He looked around in his closet for what he would call fancy. He found a pair of black dress pants he had for special occasions and an undershirt. He couldn't find a shirt to go with it, though. He looked around and found only striped and patterned shirts, none of which go with dress pants. Finally, he found a white hoodie and put it on. "You're wearing that?" they both said. His mother looked at her watch. "Oh, no time to change. Let's just go," she said as she herded Jeff and his father out the door. They crossed the street over to Barbara and Billy's house. They knocked on the door, and at it appeared that Barbara, just like his parents, way overdressed. As they walked inside, all Jeff could see were adults, no kids. "The kids are out in the yard. Jeff, how about you go and meet some of them?" said Barbara. Jeff walked outside to a yard full of kids. They were running around in weird cowboy costumes and shooting each other with plastic guns. He might as well be standing in a Toys R Us. Suddenly, a kid came up to him and handed him a toy gun and hat. "Hey, wanna play?" he said. "Ah, no kid, I'm way too old for this stuff." The kid looked at him with that weird puppy dog face. "Please?" said the kid. "Fine," said Jeff. He put on the hat and started to pretend shoot at the kids. At first, he thought it was totally ridiculous, but then he started to actually have fun. It might not have been super cool, but it was the first time he had done something that took his mind off of Lou. So he played with the kids for a while until he heard a noise. A weird rolling noise. Then it hit him. Randy, Troy, and Keith all jumped over the fence on their skateboards. Jeff dropped the fake gun and ripped off the hat. Randy looked at Jeff with a burning hatred. "Hello, Jeff, is it?" he said. "We have some unfinished business." Jeff saw his bruised nose. "I think we're even. I beat the crap out of you, and you get my brother sent to JDC. Randy got an angry look in his eyes. "Oh no, I don't go for even. I go for winning. You may have kicked our asses that one day, but not today." As he said that, Randy rushed at Jeff. They both fell to the ground. Randy punched Jeff in the nose, and Jeff grabbed him by the ears and headbutted him. Jeff pushed Randy off of him and both rose to their feet. Kids were screaming, and parents were running out of the house. Troy and Keith both pulled guns out of their pockets. "No one interrupts or guts will fly," they said. Randy pulled a knife on Jeff and stabbed it into his shoulder. Jeff screamed and fell to his knees. Randy started kicking him in the face. After 3 kicks, Jeff grabs his foot and twists it, causing Randy to fall to the ground. Jeff stood up and walked towards the back door. Troy grabbed him. Need some help? He picks Jeff up by the back of the collar and throws him through the patio door. As Jeff tries to stand, he is kicked down to the ground. Randy repeatedly starts kicking Jeff until he starts to cough up blood. Come on, Jeff, fight me. He picks Jeff up and throws him into the kitchen. Randy sees a bottle of vodka on the counter and smashes the glass over Jeff's head. Fight! He throws Jeff back into the living room. Come on, Jeff, look at me. Jeff glances up, his face riddled with blood. I was the one who got your brother sent to JDC, and now you're just gonna sit here and let him rot in there for a whole year. You should be ashamed. Jeff starts to get up. Oh, finally! You stand and fight! Jeff is now to his feet, blood and vodka on his face. Once again, he gets that strange feeling, the one in which he hasn't felt for a while. Finally! He's up! Says Randy as he runs at Jeff. That's when it happens. Something inside Jeff snaps. His psyche is destroyed. All rational thinking is gone. All he can do is kill. He grabs Randy and pile drives him to the ground. He gets on top of him and punches him straight in the heart. The punch causes Randy's heart to stop as Randy gasps for breath. Jeff hammers down on him. Punch after punch, blood gushes from Randy's body until he takes one final breath and dies. Everyone is looking at Jeff now. The parents, the crying kids, even Troy and Keith, although they easily break from their gaze and point their guns at Jeff. Jeff sees the guns trained on him and runs for the stairs. As he runs, Troy and Keith let out fire on him, each shot missing. Jeff runs up the stairs. He hears Troy and Keith follow up behind. As they let out their final rounds of bullets, Jeff ducks into the bathroom. He grabs the towel rack and rips it off the wall. Troy and Keith race in, knives ready. Troy swings his knife at Jeff, who backs away and bangs the towel rack into Troy's face. Troy goes down hard, and now all that's left is Keith. He is more agile than Troy, though, and ducks when Jeff swings the towel rack. He dropped the knife and grabbed Jeff by the neck. He pushed him into the wall. A thing of bleach fell down on top of him from the top shelf. It burnt both of them, and they both started to scream. Jeff wiped his eyes as best as he could. He pulled back the towel rack and swung it straight into Keith's head. As he lay there, bleeding to death, he let out an ominous smile. "What's so funny?" asked Jeff. Keith pulled out a lighter and switched it on. "What's funny," he said, "is that you're covered in bleach and alcohol." Jeff's eyes widened as Keith threw the lighter at him. As soon as the flame made contact with him, the flames ignited the alcohol in the vodka. While the alcohol burned him, the bleach bleached his skin. Jeff let out a terrible screech as he caught on fire. He tried to roll out the fire, but it was no use. The alcohol had made him a walking inferno. He ran down the hall and fell down the stairs. Everybody started screaming as they saw Jeff, now a man on fire, drop to the ground, nearly dead. The last thing Jeff saw was his mother and the other parents trying to extinguish the flame. That's when he passed out. When Jeff woke, he had a cast wrapped around his face. He couldn't see anything, but he felt a cast on his shoulder and stitches all over his body. He tried to stand up, but he realized that there was some tube in his arm, and when he tried to get up, it fell out, and a nurse rushed in. "I don't think you can get out of bed just yet," she said, as she put him back in his bed and reinserted the tube. Jeff sat there with no vision, no idea of what his surroundings were. Finally, after hours, he heard his mother. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked. Jeff couldn't answer, though. His face was covered, and he was unable to speak. "Oh, honey, I have great news. After all the witnesses told the police that Randy confessed of trying to attack you, they decided to let Lou go." This made Jeff almost bolt up, stopping halfway, remembering the tube coming out of his arm. "He'll be out by tomorrow, and then you two will be able to be together again." Jeff's mother hugs Jeff and says her goodbyes. The next couple of weeks were those where Jeff was visited by his family. Then came the day where his bandages were to be removed. His family members were all there to see it, what he would look like. As the doctors unwrapped the bandages from Jeff's face, everyone was on the edge of their seats. They waited until the last bandage holding the cover over his face was almost removed. "Let's hope for the best," said the doctor. He quickly pulls the cloth. letting the rest fall from Jeff's face. Jeff's mother screams at the sight of his face. Lou and Jeff's dad stare awestruck at his face. "What? What happened to my face?" Jeff said. He rushed out of bed and ran to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw the cause of the distress. His face. It's horrible. His lips were burnt to a deep shade of red. His face was turned into a pure white color, and his hair singed from brown to black. He slowly put his hand to his face. It had a sort of leathery feel to it now. He looked back at his family, then back at the mirror. "Jeff," said Lou, "it's not that bad." "Not that bad," said Jeff. "It's perfect." His family was equally surprised. Jeff started laughing uncontrollably. His parents noticed that his left eye and hand were twitching. Jeff, are you okay?" "Okay? I've never felt more happy." "Ha ha 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 ha, look at me. This face goes perfectly with me." He couldn't stop laughing. He stroked his face, feeling it, looking at it in the mirror. What caused this? Well, you may recall that when Jeff was fighting Randy, something in his mind, his sanity, snapped. Now he was left as a crazy killing machine. That is, his parents didn't know. "Doctor," said Jeff's mom, "is my son all right, in the head?" "Oh yes. This behavior is typical for patients that have taken very large amounts of painkillers. If his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here and we'll give him a psychological test." "Oh, thank you, doctor." Jeff's mother went over to Jeff. "Jeff, sweetie, it's time to go." Jeff looks away from the mirror, his face still formed into a crazy smile. "'Kay, mommy, ha ha ha." His mother took him by the shoulder and took him to get his clothes. "This is what came in," said the lady at the desk. Jeff's mom looked down to see the black dress pants and white hoodie her son wore. Now they were clean of blood and now stitched together. Jeff's mother led him to his room and made him put his clothes on. Then they left, not knowing that this was their final day of life. Later that night, Jeff's mother woke to a sound coming from the bathroom. It sounded as if someone was crying. She slowly walked over to see what it was. When she looked into the bathroom, she saw a horrendous sight. Jeff had taken a knife and carved a smile into his cheeks. "Jeff, what are you doing?" asked his mother. Jeff looked over to his mother. "I couldn't keep smiling, Mommy. It hurt after a while. Now I can smile forever." Jeff's mother noticed his eyes, ringed in black. "Jeff, your eyes." His eyes were seemingly never closing. "I couldn't see my face. I got tired and my eyes started to close. I burned out the eyelids so I could forever see myself, my new face." Jeff's mother slowly started to back away, seeing that her son was going insane. "What's wrong, Mommy? Aren't I beautiful?" "Yes, son," she said. "Yes, you are. Let me go get Daddy so he can see your face." She ran into the room and shook Jeff's dad from his sleep. "Honey, get the gun, She stopped as she saw Jeff in the doorway, holding a knife. "Mommy, you lied." That's the last thing they hear as Jeff rushes them with the knife, gutting both of them. His brother Liu woke up, startled by some noise. He didn't hear anything else, so he just shut his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. As he was on the border of slumber, he got the strangest feeling that someone was watching him. He looked up, before Jeff's hand covered his mouth. He slowly raised the knife, ready to plunge it into Lou. Lou thrashed here and there, trying to escape Jeff's grip. "Shh," Jeff said. "Just go to sleep."
Story 2. 17-year-old Marco Romano lifted the metal baseball bat over his head. It felt heavier than it should have, but he tried his best to hold his arms steady and tightened his grip. He was about to bring it down on a whimpering and writhing girl named Valentina Ricci. Her hands and ankles were bound with rope, and a filthy rag muffled her cries. She had been one of his classmates, a friend, and at one point, a girl he fancied but never dared to ask out on a date. A moment ago, she had been anonymous, thanks to the burlap sack that was secured over her head. Once it came off, though, He recognized her immediately, and he wished the sack continued to hide her face from him. Despite her swollen, tear, and makeup-smeared face, he still thought she was beautiful. Even with the gag in her mouth, he could still understand her when she looked up at him with her beautiful eyes and tried to mouth the words, "Marco, why?" Just before he swung the bat, his mind became focused on a sour memory he had of her. The metal bat made a sickening metal clink, and her skull reciprocated with an even more horrifying crack. In his mind, he did his best to remember and focus on the day she had played a prank on him while he and his classmates went out to lunch. Likely she intended her joke to be some light-hearted fun when she put mushrooms on his pizza, sliding them out of sight just under the cheese. It was well known amongst his general group of friends in school that he loathed mushrooms. She must have figured that a silly prank of this caliber would be funny, and for a few moments, it was until his face started to turn red and his throat began to close. Most people outside of his closest group of friends didn't know that Marco hated mushrooms because he was deathly allergic to them. He hid from the world a little-known fact out of shame and fear that it would make him look weak. But after that day, everyone knew, and it was all her fault. An epinephrine pen and an ambulance ride later, Marco accepted Valentina's apology over a Skype call from his bed in the hospital. But he never let go of the anger and humiliation he felt the moment she started laughing after he swallowed a bite of the poisoned pizza slice, the moment she revealed her prank. It was enough to facilitate the swing of the bat into her cranium. Blood splattered on the concrete, and he drew up the bat again. She had only screamed through her gag for a moment before the first blow silenced her, and now she had become stiff. She convulsed and stretched her limbs out hard against her bindings as blood trickled from her nose, mouth, and ear. One of her eyes had dislodged from the socket and now peered down, dancing like a marionette to the motions of Valentina's death rattles. Marco delivered blow after blow faster and faster, feeling his muscles begin to burn with the effort until her body finally lay still, and her head was an unrecognizable mixture of bone fragments and bloody brain matter. The act only lasted 45 to 60 seconds, but would have felt like a lifetime to anyone who had watched. The sounds of the metal baseball bat had echoed inside the abandoned warehouse they were in, and Marco thought he could still hear the ghostly remnant of the beating still lingering in the air. The place was eerie, even in the daytime. Now, with the gory events before him, the building had become all the more haunting in the stillness of the night. This was all forbidden territory, property that was covered by the shroud of the Italian mob and haunted by the ghosts of their former victims. Splattered brain chunks and blood were now decorating Marco's face and were mixing with the fresh droplets of sweat now trickling down his brow. He was out of breath and gripped the bat so hard that his hands first began to hurt, but now started to tingle and go numb. The rush of blood and adrenaline left him lightheaded, and now he could taste bile in his mouth, but he refused to vomit in front of his audience. A 46-year-old man in an ill-fitting cheap suit stood in front of a white SUV. The engine was still running, and the high beams were on, casting long, ominous shadows on the grim deed. 4 brutes flanked him in well-tailored black suits, his muscle that followed him everywhere he went. The little man in the big suit was Pietro De Luca, and he was an up-and-coming new lieutenant in a sub-branch of the Gambino crime family in New York. Marco first met him when his older brother, Matteo, first introduced him to the dark underworld of drugs, weapons, and good illicit sales. Marco looked up to his older brother. He wanted to be just like him, even if it meant becoming involved with the mob. The mob paid the bills after all. The mob was what made sure their mother got into a better hospital to treat her cancer. The mob was the reason they could move out of the slums. The mob was there when Marco's father wasn't. The mob seemed like the only option available for him. "What the fuck was that?" came the displeased voice of Mr. DeLuca. "This shit ain't no execution, Marco. Do them right, or else I'm shoving that bat so far up your ass, you'll bring new meaning to pitchin' and catchin', Coglione." Marco had deliberately gone for the girl's head in an attempt to get the punishment over with quickly, but the fear of retribution from his boss gave him new motivation to start taking his time with the next two hooded figures. I'm sorry, Mr. DeLuca. I'll get it right this time, sir." DeLuca didn't reply and instead motioned to one of his grunts to fetch the next person out from the back of the SUV. He reached into the inside pocket of his cheap suit, and for a moment, Marco thought he was reaching for his signature silver Smith & Wesson revolver, but was relieved to see that DeLuca was just pulling out his silver case of cigars. He cut the tip off, and immediately, one of his bodyguards lit the cigar with a butane lighter. When the first puff of smoke left DeLuca's lips, the second punishment victim had been flung down at Marco's feet. The hooded figure's hands were bound behind his back, and his ankles were tied together like Valentina's. The grunt didn't have to remove the old man's burlap sack for Marco to know already who this next victim was. Mr. Li Yang's signature suspenders and slacks were a dead giveaway. He was probably well into his mid to late 70s now, and was well known by Marco's community as the friendly Chinaman that ran the corner store on his street. For as long as Marco could remember, he had been going into Mr. Yang's store for everything from groceries to comic books. His shop was the meet-up spot after school, where friends could hang out and get a soda pop and maybe a slice of pizza. Mr. Yang's shop was especially popular for offering up free Wi-Fi for his regular customers, especially the neighborhood kids. When it was someone's birthday, Mr. Yang always made sure to give out free cans of lemonade and candy bars to the kids. In short, the older man was like a grandfather to anyone that got to know him. That cheerful Chinese man now lay at Marco's feet, bound, gagged, and bruised up. He had put up a fight, as evidenced by the large cut below his eye, not to mention the bruises around his face and arms. Whatever fight he may have had left in him quickly drained when his eyes met Marco's. A look of defeat manifested in his eyes. He recognized Marco, but said nothing as he lay there. Marco tried not to waste any time. He knew hesitation would be a sign of weakness, so the bat came down fast. The warehouse was again filled with the sounds of cracking bones, the muffled cries of pain orchestrated by the metallic sounds of the baseball bat. Marco brought down the bat over and over again, making sure to drag on the torture and beating for several minutes. As Yang took the brutal beating, he held the look of defeat, betrayal, and sadness in his eyes. Marco ignored a look as he continued to swing his weapon, grunting at every exertion of force. Marco's mind wanted to retreat and go numb, but he forced himself to remember the time Mr. Yang had scolded him for having smeared dog crap all over his shop floors. It hadn't been his fault. He didn't know he stepped in shit. But Yang forced him to mop up his floors in front of his friends. He was humiliated by the short old geezer and the authority he had over him. Under the threat of calling Marco's mother, Yang had made him kick off his filthy shoes outside and purchase a pair of yellow flower flip-flops to wear as he worked to clean up the mess. Anger guided the bat down hard on Yang's hip bone. A loud pop declared it had dislocated, and the next blow produced an even louder crack, signaling a broken bone. He swung down hard on the old man's shoulders, his arms, his hands, and lower back. He watched as his blows did real damage to the frail old man's body. He dared a glance over at DeLuca and regretted it. The sick bastard was grinning ear to ear with satisfaction. Just as Marco felt like his arms were about to fall off and he was going to keel over with exhaustion, DeLuca spoke up. All right, that's good enough, kid. Put the Chinaman out of his misery. We don't have all night in this spooky shithole. I want to see you spill his brains as you did with your girlfriend over there." Somehow Mr. Yang was still alive and still conscious enough to understand what was about to happen. Even with his numerous injuries, including his broken ribs and a shattered pelvis, he somehow managed to roll over onto his back to look up at Marco. Marco focused on the memory of the stupid yellow flower flip-flops and the nasty mop he was forced to use to clean up dog crap, while his friends laughed at him from outside the shop. He felt his face flush red when he remembered how everyone at school made him the butt of their jokes for a month straight, calling him Flip-Flop and Yang's bitch, amongst other less creative names. Moments later, he was shaking off a piece of Mr. Yang's scalp from the end of the bat and once again fighting to hold in the contents of his stomach. He refused to look weak in front of DeLuca and his goons. He even resisted the urge to wipe off the blood and chunks he could now feel on his face and in his hair. DeLuca removed the cigar from his mouth and blew out another puff of smoke before speaking with a satisfied grin on his face. "You look like you enjoyed that one. Is there a psychopath hiding under all that teenage angst?" "Don't answer that. I don't care. One more and you's in the clear." "What? You tired?" He laughed. Marco struggled to catch his breath and look down at his feet, but quickly forced himself to make eye contact with DeLuca before answering. No, Mr. DeLuca. I think I'm good." His voice was a little shaky, but he hoped his actions spoke louder than the tone in his words. DeLuca just chuckled under his breath and reinserted the cigar in between his teeth. He gestured again to one of his goons, and like a wiped dog, he went to fetch the last punishment victim. Once again, the burlap sack didn't have to come off for Marco to know who this next person was. He instantly felt as if he had rocks in his stomach and a knot in his throat. Marco stood steady and fought to control himself as he felt his knees begin to go weak and tremble under his own weight. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even stopped to consider it would be an option on DeLuca's mind. This was the one person that taught Marco everything he knew about life. This was the man that always protected him from getting hurt and made sure to take whatever blows life threw his way. It was Marco's 27-year-old big brother, Matteo. Matteo's bruised and blood-caked face was almost unrecognizable after the big goon tore off the burlap sack from his face. His nose was broken, and his right eye was nearly swollen shut. He was bruised up purple and blue, much worse than Mr. Yang, and was now short a few teeth. Matteo had always been a scrapper, a real fighter that didn't back down no matter the odds. DeLuca's grunts had worked him over pretty good already. Matteo was tied up tighter than the rest, but he made an effort to get up by pushing off the pavement with his face. This time DeLuca himself walked over and stomped down on Matteo's head. Matteo was trying to yell through the rag that was stuffed and tied down in his mouth, while De Luca started to lean down towards him as if he wanted to whisper a secret into his ear. "Shut your mouth, Romano. This here ain't nothing personal." As he said this, he waved his cigar around in the air. "We're just going through the motions with your kid brother here, that's all. But I'm sure you already knew this was gonna happen. But I bet you didn't expect this shit, huh? Maybe you should have kept your cock holster shut." De Luca quickly and unexpectedly drove the lit end of his cigar right into Matteo's purple swollen cheek at the end of his question. Matteo didn't flinch in true Romano style, but instead grunted in anger as the smoldering cigar was put out on his already damaged face. De Luca stood up and took a step back. He put out his hands, palms up and fingers straight, as if he was presenting Marco with a treasure on a silver platter. Matteo laid there now silent, except for the sound of his grinding teeth as he worked his jaws chewing through the rag in his mouth. A mix of blood and drool cascaded down his chin and cheek and started to pool at Marco's feet. For the first time, Marco hesitated. Despite everything he had learned from his big brother and the mob, he hesitated. The bat was too heavy in his hands, and his grip was too weak. His knees threatened to betray him, and he could feel the tears welling up in his eyes. He knew that the moment they rolled down his face, the signature silver Smith & Wesson revolver would come out to greet them. The Romano brothers were doomed to a quick and shameful death in a dark warehouse in the middle of nowhere. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to wonder who would take care of Ma, now that he and his brother were gone. Just as De Luca clicked his tongue in disappointment and reached up for his gun, Matteo finished chewing through the rag in his mouth, despite having fewer teeth in use. He must have swallowed part of the rag because he didn't spit anything out when he choked out his bloody speech. "Marco, you stupid, insignificant, worthless pile of dog shit. Look at yourself. A weak and pathetic excuse for a man. Not even a man. I knew ever since you were a kid that you were born a spineless and dickless coward." De Luca was stunned in place and took his hand away from his holstered revolver to enjoy the show a while longer. "You've only ever brought shame to the Romano family. You're the reason Pa left us. You were too stupid to take care of Ma when she got sick. You were a tumor on my side everywhere I went, and you never learned a goddamn thing I taught you. Even now, it's in one ear out the other, ain't it? What? You gonna cry? Cry your bitch tears then, and let De Luca put me out of my freaking misery already. You can't Marco silenced his older brother with a swift kick from his boot, further shattering what was left of his nose. At the moment when he delivered the blow, he reflected on everything his big brother had taught him. In his mind, he could hear his brother's voice speaking to him as they sat in his car on the night Marco decided to join De Luca's crew. "Look, bro, it ain't too late to back down from this. De Luca is a tyrant and a strict and sadistic bastard that accepts no excuses and looks for any sign of weakness. If you're gonna join our crew, you need to remember never to flinch, never hesitate, never show fear, and never question him. If you mess up, then take your licks like a grown-up. He won't kill you right off unless you violate his trust or disrespect the family, but he will punish you. Look, one of these days, he's going to give you an impossible task, a delivery, or a deal that he's going to rig to go bad. He's testing you. It will happen. That's going to be your final initiation to the crew, and test your loyalty to him and the family. Don't run, don't make excuses. Go back to him and tell the truth. Tell him it was your fault. Take your punishment like a grown-up. What's he gonna do to me? I ain't gonna lie to you, bro. He's gonna make you kill 3 people. Sometimes they're random hobos he finds on the streets, but other times, well, they're people you know. Look, Marco, there ain't no question that this will happen, but you can make it easier on yourself. If the people he chooses are people you know, I want you to think of the times those people pissed you off. Focus on the bad things, and hopefully, that becomes enough to let you do the thing you gotta do. Marco nervously shifted in his seat before asking a question he really didn't want to. What happens if I can't do it? What if I just can't? Matteo looked away and after a long pause, finally answered. He'll make you give his Smith & Wesson a blowjob and then feed what's left of you to the fishes. Marco did his best to forget how kind his brother had been to him and instead focused on the hateful and cruel things he had just heard. He knew he would have failed had his brother not spoken out at that moment. Matteo looked after his kid brother, even now. That outburst was a final and singular mercy he could give his little brother. Matteo had plenty of time to think while tied up in the back of DeLuca's SUV. He knew that if Marco couldn't kill him, they'd both be at the receiving end of DeLuca's gun. If the Romano brothers bit the dust that night, there'd be no one left to watch over their ma. Marco swung the bat and focused his rage on the lies his big brother had spoken. He tried to put anger and hate into every swing. He begged his brother for forgiveness in both his mind and heart because he was shouldering a pang of heavier guilt, a shameful secret that painted Marco as a coward. The day had come when Marco failed to deliver several kilos of coke. A bunch of thugs in masks jumped him and stole the goods. Worst of all, they left him unharmed, so he knew it would look bad when he went back with a story that didn't match his appearance. But DeLuca only sat and listened to him, his face never betraying a hint as to what he was thinking. After a long silence, he looked at Marco with stone-cold eyes and spoke very calmly. Look, kid, right now, I know you're going through the motions. You and your brother are real tight. I can respect that. I know he told you to expect this. I know you know this was going to happen. So, I'm going to give you a choice. A one-time deal from me, more generous than I've ever been in years. You either let the boys and me here give you a good beatdown and send you on your way out of here with a few broken bones and a few scars, no questions asked, or you stay, and I pick out 3 for the punishment of the brutal variety. You see, I can't know if I genuinely trust you when you already know how the game works, so I'm giving you a way out only out of respect for your brother. Life is a poker game, kid, so count your lucky stars that I'm a nice guy because you cheated me and took a peek at my hand. That's why I can't let you go without first putting a few scars on you. The truth was that Marco was too scared to get beaten, too scared to get hurt or feel pain. His big brother had always been there to take the blows for him, to defend him from ever getting hurt. He chose the punishment of the brutal variety, not knowing that he was allowing his big brother to take the blows. Once again, life was throwing at him. Only this time, Marco was the one dealing out the punishment.